There is a moment in Revenge of the Sith where Palpatine leans forward in the darkness of the Coruscant Opera House and begins to tell Anakin Skywalker a story about a Sith Lord so powerful that he could prevent the ones he cared about from dying. He speaks quietly, almost gently. He describes this man's mastery over life and death as though he is sharing a curiosity, a piece of interesting old history. And when Anakin asks whether the Jedi could learn this power, Palpatine pauses. He says, "Not from a Jedi. Sit with that for a second. Let it settle the way the room settles just before you close your eyes." Palpatine is not just offering Anakin a lesson. He is laying a trap with geological patience. This single conversation took 30 years to set up. The manufacturing of a war, the building of two armies, the careful positioning of this exact senator in this exact seat, all of it, for this moment, so that one man, in the dark, could lean toward a young Jedi who was afraid of losing someone he loved and say exactly those words. That is the Sith. Not just power, not just darkness. Precision. The willingness to spend decades on a single move. The ability to see not just the next step, but the 100th step, the 1,000th, and to arrange the world so that the outcome you want appears to your victim as their own free choice. That is the thing about them I keep coming back to. Cruelty is common. Patience like that is not. The Sith did not begin with Palpatine. They did not begin with Darth Bane or Darth Revan, or any of the names most people know. They began with a schism so old it predates the Republic itself. A break in the Force that happened before the Jedi Order had its current name, before the Republic had mapped most of the galaxy, before anyone alive had a word for what the dark side actually was. And they end, after 25,000 years, with a young woman standing in the ruins of the oldest Sith stronghold in the known galaxy, deflecting lightning back at the man who arranged everything. This video covers all of it, from the first exile to the final battle, the empires that rose and burned, the rules and the betrayals, the men and women who chose the dark side and what choosing it actually cost them. Every era, every major figure, the philosophy underneath it all, and what that philosophy produces when followed to its absolute conclusion. Welcome to Twin Suns. Get comfortable. Dim the light if the light is still on. Let your shoulders drop. This one goes all the way back to the beginning. Let us begin. The Sith do not begin with hatred. They begin with a disagreement. That is worth understanding clearly before anything else can make sense. The story of the Sith, the version that has shaped 25,000 years of galactic history, does not start with someone choosing evil in any simple way. It starts with Jedi, with people who believed in the Force, who studied it and dedicated their lives to it, and who arrived at different conclusions than the ones the Order approved of. What happens after that is a story about what those conclusions lead to when there is no middle ground, no synthesis, no willingness to coexist. Before Darth Vader, before Darth Bane, before the very name Sith was attached to dark side practitioners, there was the planet Tython. In the expanded universe, the vast library of Star Wars novels, comics, games, and sourcebooks that existed before Disney acquired Lucasfilm in 2012 and established a new official canon, Tython is where the Force tradition that eventually became the Jedi Order was born. Scholars on this world discovered what they called the Force, a mysterious energy field that connected all living things, and they disagreed, immediately and bitterly, about its nature. There were those who believed the light side of the Force was the true path, and there were those drawn to what they called the Bogan, the dark side, who argued that passion and power were not corruptions of the Force, but expressions of its genuine nature. This conflict, known as the Force Wars of Tython, played out roughly 25,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. The followers of the light side won. The followers of the Bogan were defeated. The victors went on to found what would become the Jedi Order. But the Bogan did not vanish. It survived in the form of those who kept practicing it. And roughly 500 years after the Force Wars, a Jedi Master named Xendor led what historians in that era called the Legions of Lettow, a group of dark side practitioners who rejected the Order's authority over the Force and refused to subordinate themselves to Jedi doctrine. The schism was brief, but violent. Xendor was killed in battle, and the legions were scattered. First Great Schism ended. Dark side suppressed, light side dominant. It will not hold. It never does. The next schism, the one that actually matters, the one that produced the Sith as an institution, happened many thousands of years later, around 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. A Jedi named Ajunta Pal led a group of dark side practitioners in open rebellion against the Order. The specifics of what they were arguing about have the quality of all ancient theological disputes. They seem obscure from a distance and world-ending from inside. Paul and his followers believed that the Force had no inherent moral polarity, that the dark side was not corruption but potential, and that the Jedi's refusal to explore that potential was not wisdom but cowardice. What followed was roughly a century of war. The 100-year darkness, the sources call it, and at its end, around 6,900 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Dark Jedi lost. The survivors were tried by the Order and sentenced not to death but to exile. They were put on ships and sent out of known Republic space. Think about what that decision actually means. The Jedi Council had a choice. They could execute these people. They chose not to. Whether from mercy or from principle, they sent the Dark Jedi away with their lives and their knowledge of the Force. This is one of the most consequential acts of restraint in galactic history, because what happens next would not have been possible if the Jedi had simply killed the people they had defeated. I find that quietly staggering. An entire 25,000-year shadow, born because a council decided, one morning, not to draw a saber. The exiles traveled through the unknown regions, and one of them, a woman named Sorza's Sin, had read of a place, a planet called Korriban, at the edge of the galaxy, home to a species called the Sith. Here is what the original Sith actually were. Not humans, not fallen Jedi. The original Sith were a species, red-skinned humanoids characterized by bone spurs, facial tentacles, and a near-genetic affinity for the dark side of the Force. They had built a civilization on Korriban across thousands of years. They practiced forms of Force manipulation that the Jedi had no name for. Sith sorcery, Sith alchemy, rituals involving sacrifice and transformation. Their society was stratified by power. The most Force-sensitive among them were priests and warriors. The rest served them. When the exiled Dark Jedi arrived at Korriban, the Sith species encountered beings more powerful in the Force than anything in their own civilization, and they responded the way their culture had prepared them to respond. They treated these new arrivals as gods. Ajunta Pal took the throne. He became the first Dark Lord of the Sith. This is the moment the Sith were born. Not as a species, they already existed, but as an institution, a tradition, a title, a lineage that would persist for nearly 7,000 years. The exiled Dark Jedi and the Sith species merged over the following centuries, interbreeding, sharing knowledge, fusing their traditions. The Force sorcery of the original Sith blended with the lightsaber mastery of the Dark Jedi. Sith alchemy produced weapons, monsters, and fortifications. The Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban filled with tombs of rulers who believed death itself was negotiable. And the name Sith, an ancient word belonging to a species of red-skinned aliens on a distant world, became the name of an order, a philosophy, and the greatest organized threat to peace the galaxy would ever produce. One more detail before leaving this era. The planet Korriban, or Moraband, as George Lucas personally renamed it for Star Wars, The Clone Wars, is the Sith homeworld in current canon. Lucas chose the new name specifically because he liked its connection to the word moribund, meaning at the point of death. A dying world, a dead tradition, sealed in tombs. The original name Korriban was later recanonized as an ancient name for the same planet, quietly acknowledged in newer sources. The Valley of the Dark Lords stands on both versions of the world, and in the canonical Clone Wars series, Yoda travels there as part of his path to learning the secrets of eternal consciousness. Even the Jedi, in the end, came looking for answers in the tombs of their oldest enemies. If that is not a slow, quiet form of poetry, I do not know what is. There is a version of the Sith story that most people skip past because it predates the movies by 5,000 years. But it is where the Sith reached their first real peak, not as exiles or outcasts, as an empire. The old Sith Empire grew in the millennia following Ajunta Pal. Dark Lords rose and fell. Wars were fought. Succession was rarely peaceful. Among the Sith, the right to rule was established by defeating the previous ruler, which meant that every transition of power was a test of strength. The weak did not inherit the Sith Empire. The strongest took it, and only for as long as they could hold it. By roughly 5,100 years before the Battle of Yavin, The Dark Lord was a man named Marka Ragnos. His rule represented the height of the old Sith Empire. He was ancient even by the standards of Force users, a figure of enormous power and cunning, and under his leadership the Empire reached its greatest territorial extent and its deepest cultural complexity. The Sith of this era were not simply warriors. They were scholars of the dark side, masters of alchemy and sorcery, builders of monuments that would last for millennia. During the reign of Ragnos, on a small Sith world called Medrias, an illegitimate child of a Sith Lord named Dramath was born. This child had no status, no recognition, no formal place in the Sith hierarchy. As a boy, so the surviving accounts have it, he killed his entire village. He challenged his father in direct combat and destroyed him. Marka Ragnos recognized power when he saw it even in a child, gave the boy rulership over Medrias, and named him Lord Vitiate. Vitiate watched everything that followed from a careful distance. That is the thing to remember about him. He watched. Ragnos died around 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, and the moment he died, everything began to crack. Two Sith Lords, Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh, began dueling over his tomb to determine who would inherit the Empire. Sadow wanted expansion, conquest, a Sith invasion of the rich and supposedly vulnerable Republic. Kresh was isolationist, certain that any contact with the Republic would bring destruction down on the Sith. These were not minor policy disagreements. They were two fundamentally different visions of what the Sith Empire was for. And then two Republic scouts arrived by accident. A ship, lost in the unknown regions, stumbled into Sith space. The pilots, Gav and Jory Daragon, were discovered and captured. Kresh wanted them executed as spies. Sadow saw them differently. He secretly freed the pilots, manipulated the situation to frame Kresh for the rescue, and used the resulting chaos to seize the title of Dark Lord. Then he used the Daragons as a tool to get back inside Republic space, preparing for an invasion. The Great Hyperspace War, roughly 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, was Naga Sadow's bid to conquer the Republic. He led a Sith fleet through hyperspace and struck at multiple worlds simultaneously. For a brief moment, the invasion seemed to be working. Then it collapsed. Gav Daragon, who had traveled with Sadow, helped the Republic by transmitting fleet coordinates. The Sith assault lost cohesion. Republic forces turned the tide. The invasion forces were shattered. Sadow retreated to Korriban. Ludo Kresh, who had survived and rallied, was waiting. Kresh ambushed Sadow's returning fleet. Sadow responded by ramming one of his own ships into Kresh's flagship, destroying them both. Sadow himself fled further into space and eventually settled on the jungle moon of Yavin 4, where he died in self-imposed exile after creating Massassi warrior slaves through Sith alchemy. The old Sith Empire was gone, undone by two lords who could not stop measuring themselves against each other. Vitiate had watched all of this without committing his forces to any of it. After the Great Hyperspace War ended and the Republic was hunting down surviving Sith Lords, Vitiate reached out to the scattered Sith leadership and invited them to a gathering on Nathema. He described it as a ritual that would save the Sith from annihilation and grant them power beyond what any had imagined. By most accounts, roughly 1,000 Sith Lords attended. What happened on Nathema is one of the most disturbing events in all of Sith history, even in a tradition defined by atrocity. Vitiate performed a ritual that lasted days. It consumed every one of those Sith Lords, every other living being on the planet, animals, insects, plants, microbes. He drained the Force itself from Nathema. Every living thing died. The planet became a void in the Force, a world where visitors would later describe an overwhelming sense of wrongness, of absence, as though something essential had been surgically removed from reality itself. From this ritual, Vitiate emerged with power that bordered on godhood. He was effectively immortal. He could perceive the galaxy through other beings. He could transfer his consciousness. He had not just embraced the dark side, he had consumed it, in the most literal possible sense. Then he vanished into the unknown regions, taking the surviving fragments of Sith culture with him, and spent centuries building a new empire in secret. Vitiate represents the Sith at their most absolute, a being who was not content to rule, who was not satisfied with power, who wanted something closer to omnipotence. And he achieved it, at the cost of an entire planet's worth of life. That is not a small thing. In terms of raw body count accomplished in a single act, it is probably the single most destructive event in Sith history until Darth Nihilus came along. But there are other figures in this ancient period who shaped what the Sith became. Figures whose influence traveled forward through centuries, not through armies or empires, but through something quieter and more insidious: the dead teaching the living. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Vitiate's story does not end with the Nathema ritual and his disappearance into the unknown regions. It continues for another 14 centuries, making him, in terms of sheer longevity of malevolence, the longest sustained individual threat in the entire history of the dark side. After absorbing the Force essence of 1,000 Sith Lords and an entire planet's worth of life, Vitiate spent centuries in the unknown regions, building what became the Sith Empire's second form. A hidden state with a military, a fleet, a culture, and a governing structure. He ruled as the Sith Emperor, and his control was absolute in ways that would have been impossible for any ordinary ruler. He could perceive through the minds of his subjects. He could reach into beings across vast distances through the Force. He could direct his empire through subordinates he had psychically dominated to the point of near puppethood. This is the Sith Empire that Revan and Malak encountered, the one that captured them and turned them. And it is the Empire that later launched the Great Galactic War against the Republic, roughly 3,681 years before the Battle of Yavin. The massively multiplayer online role-playing game Star Wars: The Old Republic, released in December of 2011, depicts this era. The Republic and the Jedi Order fighting a prolonged war against an empire that had been preparing for the conflict for over a millennium. But even this war was not Vitiate's ultimate purpose. His Nathema ritual had given him power and near immortality, but it had not given him what he truly wanted. What he truly wanted was the complete annihilation of all life in the galaxy. Another ritual, Nathema scaled up from one planet to every inhabited world in existence. He wanted to consume the entire galaxy the way he had consumed Nathema, and he spent centuries working toward it. To do this without his empire knowing and revolting, he built a second identity, Valkorion, the peaceful and beloved ruler of the Eternal Empire on the planet Zakul, a separate civilization he had created as a hidden laboratory and power base. As Valkorion, he cultivated children, built a culture, maintained the appearance of a benevolent monarch. As Vitiate, he continued his preparations for galactic extinction. He is, in some ways, the most complete expression of what the Sith tradition produces when it has unlimited time and unlimited power. He did not want to rule the galaxy. He wanted to end it. Every other Sith Lord in this history, even Palpatine at his most extreme, wanted control, wanted power, wanted to reshape rather than erase. Vitiate had been so fully consumed by the dark side that what remained of him had no constructive impulse left at all. Only hunger, only destruction. Read that back to yourself. There is nowhere lower for a person to go. Vitiate was eventually destroyed through the combined efforts of the protagonists of the Old Republic story content, including Revan himself, who had spent centuries in a psychic prison created by Vitiate, and whose existence had become intertwined with the Emperor's in ways that took years of expansion content to unravel. The specifics are elaborate and belong more fully to that game's era than to this broader history. What matters here is the shape of his arc. He was born with nothing. He killed to take power. He used that power to take more power. He spent 1,400 years accumulating and accumulating, consuming everything in his path, and at the end of it, he had become something that was barely a person. A Force predator wearing a human face, interested in nothing except the next meal. That is the dark side followed to its most extreme conclusion, with no Jedi tradition to create the contrast, no rule of two to constrain the excess, just a being of enormous power that had been eating itself into something monstrous for over a millennium. Vitiate's war on the Republic did not stay abstract either. The Great Galactic War, which the sources place beginning around 3,681 years before the Battle of Yavin, ran for almost 3 decades. It was a slow, grinding conflict of fleet actions and border worlds and hard, unromantic Sith advances. And in the middle of it stands one of the more interesting figures the Old Republic era produced, a Sith Lord called Darth Malgus. Malgus is worth a moment on his own. He was, by the standards of his tradition, unusually clear-eyed. He believed in the Empire, in the war, in the philosophy, but he also fell in love with a Twi'lek slave he had freed, a woman named Alina Daru, and kept her at his side for years. He fought alongside her, took her into the Jedi Temple during the sacking of Coruscant, treated her as a partner rather than a possession, and then, later, when he became convinced that his love for her had become a weakness that could be used against him, he killed her himself, stabbed his own lightsaber through her heart. That is the Sith philosophy meeting its own logic. Love is real. Love is dangerous. Kill the source. Malgus was a genuine believer who chose the belief over the person, and even inside the tradition that shocked people. His most famous act is the sacking of Coruscant. Malgus led a Sith strike team into the Jedi Temple during the closing move of the Great Galactic War, breached the building the Order believed unbreachable, and cut through Jedi as a distraction while the Sith fleet bombarded the capital. It was a stunning tactical victory and, in the game's own storytelling, one of the loudest pieces of evidence that a determined, well-funded, patient Sith Empire is exactly as dangerous as its worst nightmares suggest. The Treaty of Coruscant that followed left the Republic humiliated and half the galaxy under Sith rule, and it launched the uneasy Cold War period the main body of the Old Republic MMO plays out inside. Revan's own return in that era is worth a paragraph too, because it complicates the neat KOTOR ending. In the SWTOR expansion Shadow of Revan, released in December of 2014, Revan comes back not as a hero or a villain, but as something in between, a man who has been broken apart and put back together by Vitiate for centuries, and now wants a version of the galaxy Revan himself does not fully agree with. Different pieces of him pull in different directions. Jedi factions and Sith factions and Republic special forces all end up in the same throne room, trying to sort out which Revan gets to make the final decision. It is, in its way, one of the strangest things done with a legacy character in Star Wars, and it goes almost unmentioned in mainline discussions of him. If you have never played the game, that is fine. The shape of it still matters. Revan spent centuries as a puppet of the man he had gone into the unknown regions to stop. And even after he was pulled loose from that, he did not simply snap back into being the hero of the first game. He came out of it warped. Just less warped than the Emperor had wanted him to be. There is a specific kind of legacy that the Sith developed, which has no real equivalent in Jedi tradition. The Jedi pass on their knowledge through the living. Master to Padawan, presence to presence, the relationship requiring breath and proximity and time. The Sith learn to pass on their knowledge through the dead. Sith spirits, apparitions of Dark Lords whose physical bodies were long gone but whose presence remained. Trapped in objects, in temples, in the Force itself, able to corrupt and instruct anyone who came looking for power. This tradition begins, in practical terms, with a man named Freedon Nadd. Nadd was a Jedi Padawan, roughly 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. He killed his own master when the master declined to promote him to Jedi Knight. Then he traveled to the surviving fragments of Sith knowledge, trained under the spirit of Naga Sadow who had left records on Yavin 4, absorbed what Sadow could teach him, and eventually destroyed Sadow's spirit and claimed the title of Dark Lord of the Sith for himself. He conquered the planet Onderon, a divided world with a walled city, Iziz, ruled by those aligned with him, and an outer population of beast riders who lived beyond the walls, and ruled it as a dark side king. He died physically many centuries before the events of the movies, but his spirit did not dissipate. It clung to the physical world, attached to his sarcophagus, to temples, to anyone who opened themselves to the dark side and came looking for instruction. Nadd's most consequential influence happened entirely after his death. A Jedi Padawan named Exar, brilliant, arrogant, obsessed with Sith knowledge beyond what the Order permitted, encountered Nadd's spirit and was guided by it deeper into darkness. The ghost led Kun to Korriban, then to Yavin 4, using the young Jedi's hunger as a lever. Kun eventually surpassed Nadd's influence and destroyed his spirit, just as Nadd had destroyed Sadow's, but not before absorbing everything Nadd could teach him. There is a pattern here that the Sith keep returning to. The master teaches the student everything, and the student destroys the master to take their place. In Sith tradition, a master who can be surpassed deserved to be surpassed. The destruction of the teacher by the student is proof that the teaching worked. This is what the rule of two would formalize thousands of years later, but the instinct predates Darth Bane by millennia. It is baked into how these people think about the transfer of knowledge. Freedon Nadd's specific historical contribution was not conquest. It was the demonstration that the dark side could propagate through death, that a Sith Lord's influence did not end with their body, that the knowledge and the corruption could persist in temples and spirits and objects for centuries, waiting for someone strong enough or hungry enough to receive it. The dark side, in this model, is almost viral. It does not need a living host to spread. The Great Sith War, the conflict that erupted around 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin and consumed the galaxy for years, needs to be understood in two separate halves, because it has two separate architects. The first is Exar Kun. The second is a Jedi Knight named Ulic Qel-Droma. There is a moment in the Great Sith War, a moment that carries the entire weight of what war between Force users actually produces, where Ulic Qel-Droma fights his own brother. His brother's name is Kay, and Kay, who has followed Ulic through his fall to the dark side hoping to reach him, who has watched his brother become something unrecognizable, and has never stopped trying to bring him back. Kay does not attack with hatred or vengeance. He refuses to fight. Ulic kills him anyway. That is the Great Sith War in a single image. Not the grand fleet battles, not the temple sieges, but two brothers, one of whom has been swallowed by a darkness he chose and then could not choose his way back out of, standing across from each other. One of them will not fight. The other cannot stop. Exar Kun had been a Jedi Padawan of Master Vodo-Siosk Baz, a figure described across Legends sources as one of the most respected Jedi teachers of his era. Kun was exceptional. He was also incapable of accepting limits on his pursuit of knowledge. When he learned that Sith knowledge existed, that the Jedi Council had restricted, he pursued it. His search led him to Freedon Nadd's spirit, then to the Sith tombs on Korriban, then to Yavin 4, where Nadd's influence ran deepest. On Yavin 4, Kun was physically destroyed in a force trap set by Nadd's spirit. His life signs failed, and then, in the space between life and death, he agreed to embrace the dark side completely in exchange for survival. He rose as a Sith Lord, enslaved the Massassi through Sith alchemy, and eventually declared himself Dark Lord of the Sith. He also produced a double-bladed lightsaber, the weapon that would centuries later become one of the most recognizable symbols of Sith identity. Ulic Qel-Droma was a Jedi Knight who attempted to infiltrate the Krath, a dark side cult that had seized control of the Empress Teta system. The plan was to go undercover, learn what he could, then return. The plan failed in the way that plans to pretend to embrace the dark side almost always fail. The dark side does not let you pretend for long. Qel-Droma fell genuinely, was captured, was rescued, was brought before the Jedi Council, and rejected their help. He chose the darkness fully. Kun found him and named him his apprentice. Together they launched the Great Sith War, a galaxy-spanning conflict that brought the Jedi Order to near collapse. The war ended not through a single decisive battle, but through accumulation. Qel-Droma killed his brother Kay and was immediately stripped of his connection to the Force by a Jedi named Nomi Sunrider, who performed a complete severing, a technique so absolute that Qel-Droma spent the rest of his life unable to feel the Force at all. He helped the Jedi locate Kun afterward, an act that might be called atonement, or might simply be described as a man with nothing left doing the only useful thing he could think of. The Jedi struck at Yavin 4 with their combined Force power. Kun, unable to escape, separated his spirit from his body and bound it to the Massassi temples to avoid death. His physical body burned. His spirit survived, trapped in the ruins of Yavin 4 for 4,000 years. Until, in Legends-era stories set after the original trilogy, a group of students from Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Praxium encountered it. That is not a small thing. A man who chose the dark side over all limits ended up imprisoned in stone ruins on a jungle moon while the galaxy moved on without him for 4 millennia. The dark side did not free him. It locked him into a temple and left him there. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a version of Revan that the story keeps trying to tell you is simple. A Jedi who fell, a Sith who came back, a hero who overcame his own darkness. And there is truth in that reading. The bones of it are accurate enough. But what that reading misses is the specifics. What makes Revan different from every other fallen Jedi in this history? is not that he fell. It is why he fell, and what that fall reveals about the relationship between the Sith and the Jedi that the Order itself was never willing to examine. The context is the Mandalorian Wars, roughly 3,976 to 3,960 years before the Battle of Yavin. The Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, under a leader known as Mandalore the Ultimate, launched a campaign of conquest against Republic worlds. They were brutal, systematic, and effective. The Republic was losing, and the Jedi Council, in response, did something that a part of the galaxy never forgave them for. They refused to fight. The Council's reasoning was that the Mandalorian Wars were not the Jedi's conflict, that committing to a galaxy-spanning war would require choices the Jedi could not make cleanly, that there was something about the conflict that felt wrong in the Force. They were right about that last part. They simply did not understand what they were feeling. A Jedi named Revan disagreed with their inaction. He and his closest companion, a man named Malak, gathered a substantial force of Jedi who shared their conviction and defied the Council's directive. They went to war. They turned the Mandalorian campaign around through strategic brilliance and sheer effectiveness. At the Battle of Malachor V, Revan killed Mandalore the Ultimate personally and ended the war. In his dying breath, Mandalore told Revan something Revan would never forget. The Mandalorians had been manipulated. A Sith influence had engineered the war, had used the Mandalorians as a weapon to weaken the Republic and draw Jedi like Revan into a conflict that would serve the dark side's purposes. Revan understood what this meant. There was a Sith presence operating in the unknown regions, something powerful enough to manipulate an entire warrior culture without being detected. He went to find it. He never came back as the person he was. The being in the unknown regions was Vitiate, the Sith Emperor, who had been building his hidden empire for over 1,000 years, and who had orchestrated the Mandalorian Wars precisely to create this scenario. Strong, capable Force users following the evidence directly into his reach. Vitiate captured Revan and Malak. He broke them, psychically and spiritually, and turned them to the dark side. But here is the thing about Revan that makes this particular fall different from most. Vitiate did not create a Sith who served the Emperor. He created a Sith who, somewhere underneath the conditioning, was still thinking for himself. Revan emerged from Vitiate's influence as Darth Revan, Dark Lord of the Sith, but retained more of himself than Vitiate intended. He built his own Sith empire not to destroy the Republic outright but to harden it, to prepare it for the eventual war with Vitiate that Revan privately believed was coming. He was not purely conquering. He was trying, in the darkest possible way, to save what he had gone out to protect. That is not the behavior of someone who simply chose power. That is the behavior of someone still trying to fulfill a mission through means that had long since stopped being justifiable. And honestly, it is the most interesting fall in the entire tradition to me, because it is not a fall from wisdom into hunger. It is a fall from strategy into a slightly darker strategy, made by a man who believed, right up to the end, that he still knew what he was doing. The game Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic, released by BioWare and LucasArts in 2003, told this story, or rather, allowed the player to experience a version of it. It remains one of the most acclaimed Star Wars stories ever told, and its central reveal, that the player has been playing as Revan all along, a Jedi whose mind was wiped by the Order itself, is one of the most effective narrative reversals in the entire franchise. Revan's reign as Darth Revan ended when a Jedi named Bastila Shan and a strike team boarded his flagship. His apprentice Malak, seizing the opportunity, betrayed Revan and fired on the ship. Bastila used a rare Force ability called Battle Meditation to stabilize Revan's dying mind. The Order chose not to execute him but to wipe his memory and implant a new identity, using him as a tool to find and destroy Malak and the Star Forge, an ancient Sith factory they had discovered together. Malak's final words to Revan, at the moment of his defeat, were not rage or defiance. They were something closer to grief. He said, essentially, that he wondered what would have happened if they had never gone to war, if they had listened to the Council. He died wondering. Sit with that too. The apprentice, at the very end, wondering out loud whether the Council might have been right after all. The aftermath of Revan's war left the galaxy with a particular kind of wound. Not a military defeat, not a territory change, something harder to map. The Jedi Order, already fractured by the Mandalorian Wars, was further weakened by the Jedi Civil War. The connections between Jedi across the galaxy had been severed or strained. The Order was present, but damaged in ways it could not easily diagnose. Three beings moved into that space. They called themselves the Sith Triumvirate. Their names were Darth Traya, Darth Nihilus, and Darth Sion. And what they represent, taken together, is the dark side pushed to its most extreme logical conclusions. Three different answers to the question of what a person becomes when they give themselves over to darkness completely. Darth Traya had been Kreia, a Jedi Master, one of the best teachers the Order had ever produced, by some accounts. She had trained Revan, among others. She had watched the Order refuse to intervene in the Mandalorian Wars, had watched Revan go anyway, had watched the catastrophic fallout, and she had concluded something that neither the Jedi nor the Sith would fully accept, that the Force itself was the problem, that a galaxy enslaved to the dictates of an energy field, whether through the Jedi's submission to it or the Sith's weaponization of it, was not free. She wanted to wound the Force, to break the cycle. She took the title Darth Traya, Lord of Betrayal. Darth Nihilus was something else entirely. He had been present at the Battle of Malachor V, the catastrophic final battle of the Mandalorian Wars, where a superweapon called the Mass Shadow Generator killed nearly everyone on the planet's surface. The Force wound created there, a place where so many lives were extinguished so suddenly that the Force itself was damaged, left a hole in Nihilus. Or rather, it turned him into a hole. He became a being defined entirely by hunger. He needed to consume the Force energy of living beings to survive. He wore armor and a mask because there was nothing recognizable left underneath. He had ceased to be a person and become an appetite. He demonstrated what he was at the Jedi Conclave on Qatar. Nihilus arrived and simply consumed the planet, drained every living thing on it, leaving only a Miralukan woman named Visas Mar alive, possibly because her connection to the Force registered as something other than food, an entire planet's worth of life, drained by a single being's hunger. This is not metaphor. That is literally what Nihilus did. Darth Sion was the third member. His body had been destroyed in combat more times than anyone had counted, but he refused to stay dead. He held himself together through pure will, dark side energy channeling through his broken body, keeping shattered bone and ruined flesh coherent through nothing but refusal. Every wound remained, nothing healed. He was a collection of every injury he had ever sustained, still walking, still fighting. The three of them turned on each other, as Sith always do. Nihilus and Sion eventually betrayed Traya, stripped her of her Force connection, and exiled her again. Their collective destruction came through the events of Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords, developed by Obsidian Entertainment, and released in 2004. Traya's final monologue in that game is one of the most philosophically dense pieces of Star Wars writing anywhere in the franchise. What the Triumvirate represents, taken seriously, is the dark side consuming itself at every level simultaneously. Traya hated the Force. Nihilus was incapable of anything but consuming it. Sion was too broken to do anything but persist. Three beings defined entirely by what the dark side had taken from them, with nothing left to offer except destruction. They could not build. They could not transmit knowledge with any stability. They could not maintain a Sith civilization. They were the endpoint. What happens when you follow darkness to its absolute conclusion with nothing held back? The dark side, in this framing, does not reward. It hollows out. The player character of Knights of the Old Republic 2 deserves a word here, because she is the closest thing the Old Republic era has to a direct thematic answer to the Triumvirate. She is called the Jedi Exile, or in later Legends material, Mitra Surik. She had been one of Revan's generals in the Mandalorian Wars. She had ordered the Mass Shadow Generator activated at Malachor V, killed almost everyone on that planet, and been so scarred by what she had done that she cut herself off from the Force voluntarily. When the Jedi Council could not reach her afterward, they exiled her. That was where the game found her. A woman without the Force, walking back into a galaxy that had almost lost the Jedi entirely. What is interesting about her, and about Krea's role as her mentor, is that the game does not tell you the exile is a hero. It tells you she is a wound in the Force that other beings orbit. Nihilus is drawn to her because he cannot understand why she is not food. Sion is drawn to her because he wants to break her the way he cannot break himself. Kreia is drawn to her because she thinks the exile is proof that a Force user can survive without either the Jedi Code or the Sith Code, and that is the thing Kreia is trying to build. A person, singular, who has stepped outside the argument. The exile does not settle the debate, but she stands in the middle of it as a living demonstration that the sides were never the whole picture. That is a rare thing in Star Wars. Almost every other Force user in the history I have gone through in this video has been shaped by either the Jedi or the Sith. The exile is one of the very few who is shaped by neither. What she does with that, in the game's various endings and later novels, is honestly less important than the fact of her existing at all. Someone stepped off the wheel. Not everybody who touches the Force has to spend their life inside the wheel. What follows the Knights of the Old Republic era is, in terms of Sith history, the most chaotic period in the tradition's long existence. The New Sith Wars, which began roughly 2,000 years before the Battle of Yavin and lasted approximately 1,000 years, represent the Sith at their most fragmented and frantic. The tradition eating itself alive in a way that finally convinced one man that everything needed to change. The conflict began when a Jedi Master named Darth Ruin created the Fourth Great Schism around 2,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. Ruin believed the Jedi were arrogant hypocrites, that their claim to neutrality and peace was a mask for control. He founded a new Sith Empire, declared war on the Republic, and was promptly killed by his own disciples. That is the New Sith Wars in miniature, a tradition so committed to betrayal that it could not even sustain the pretense of unity long enough to win a single campaign. For roughly 1,000 years, waves of Sith invasions and internal conflicts and tentative agreements and further betrayals played out across the galaxy. Multiple Sith empires rose and fell. Multiple attempts at Sith unity collapsed into faction wars. Multiple promising Sith Lords were killed by their own apprentices before they could accomplish anything lasting. The Jedi Order, battered and weakened, held on through sheer institutional persistence. Nothing else. The last major attempt to change this came from a Sith Lord named Skara Khan. Around 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, Khan reunited the fractured Sith factions into what he called the Brotherhood of Darkness. He abolished the title Darth and preached equality among Sith, arguing that the constant competition for supreme individual power was what had always destroyed them. No single ruler, a brotherhood of equals, united against the Jedi. It was a reasonable diagnosis. It was a terrible solution. A Sith tradition built around equality could not actually achieve equality because it was still full of Sith. People whose entire philosophy was that power was the only meaningful currency. Telling those people to cooperate rather than compete did not change who they were. It just gave them a more comfortable story to tell themselves while they competed anyway, but more quietly. One member of the Brotherhood watched all of this with what can only be described as contempt. His name, at birth, was Dessel. Dessel was born on Apatros, a small mining planet. His father was a miner. He worked the same mines from childhood. Physical, grinding, punishing work on a world with no sky worth looking at. He had no education, no prospects, and no reason to believe the galaxy would ever offer him anything different. He was also, without knowing it, gifted in the Force. This is important to understand. Bane did not arrive at the dark side through ideology, at least not initially. He arrived through circumstances. He was drafted into the Republic Army. He fought in conflicts related to the New Sith Wars. He discovered he had capabilities he could not explain. Moments of perception, of reflexive awareness, that kept him alive when logic said he should be dead. He was eventually identified as a potential Force user and recruited into the Brotherhood of Darkness. At the Brotherhood's academy on Korriban, he trained. He was competent. And then something happened that changed everything. He read. He found the ancient texts of the Sith, the records of Darth Revan and the Lords before him, and he began to understand something about the tradition he was now part of that the Brotherhood was deliberately obscuring. The Sith had always been destroyed by their own weakness for infighting. Every great Sith civilization had collapsed because Sith Lords could not stop competing with and betraying each other. Khan's Brotherhood was no different. It was the same problem wearing more agreeable clothes. Khan, Bane concluded, was not a reformer. He was a coward in a tradition that had always rewarded cowards with destruction. Bane decided the entire Brotherhood had to go. The weapon he used was the thought bomb. This is one of the most dramatic and specific pieces of dark side lore in the entire Legends tradition. The Thought Bomb was an ancient Sith technique, a dark side explosion of concentrated Force energy that destroyed every Force-sensitive being in the area simultaneously. It consumed Jedi and Sith alike without discrimination. It was, in practice, a suicide weapon for Force users. Bane fed the knowledge of the Thought Bomb to Khan and the Brotherhood. He manipulated Khan's fear and desperation, because Khan was, beneath everything, a man terrified of losing, until the Brotherhood detonated it at the 7th Battle of Ruusan, around 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. The explosion killed every Force user on Ruusan, every Jedi at the battle, every Sith in the Brotherhood. The tradition that Khan had built was erased in a single moment. Bane had arranged to be elsewhere. He stood afterward as the only dark side practitioner alive, the only Sith. And he spent the remaining years of his life building a new tradition based on a single, profound principle. The weakness of the Sith was never their power, it was their numbers. 2, only ever 2. The rule of 2, as Bane formulated it, was elegantly simple and brutally demanding. There shall be one master who embodies the dark side's power, and one apprentice who craves it. The apprentice's purpose is to grow until strong enough to kill the master and take their place. The master's purpose is to make themselves worthy of surviving that attempt. Every generation, the tradition is tested. Every generation, only the strong continue it. This system prevented the infighting that had destroyed every previous Sith civilization. With only 2 Sith, there was no factional politics, no competing ambitions, no opportunity for the kind of large-scale betrayal that had killed the old Sith Empire and the Brotherhood alike. The cost was that the tradition grew slowly. The benefit was that it was no longer self-destructing. Darth Bane appears in current canon. He is confirmed as a deceased Sith spirit in Star Wars, The Clone Wars, specifically in the Season 6 episode Sacrifice, when Yoda travels to Moraband and encounters his apparition. This places Bane firmly in canonical continuity, even if the full Legends backstory around him is not fully confirmed. Bane's own apprentice was a young woman named Xana, born Rain, whom he had taken as a child on Ruusan. She grew into a Sith sorceress of considerable power, and by most accounts of the Legends novels, she eventually killed Bane in single combat, fulfilling the rule exactly as he had designed it. The tradition passed to Xana, and from Xana it would pass down, master to apprentice, killing to killing, for the next 1,000 years. There is something almost admirable about the rule of 2, and there is something genuinely horrifying about it, and both of those things are simultaneously true. Bane's insight was real. The Sith's previous failures had been caused by fragmentation and infighting. The rule of 2 solved that problem with brutal elegance, but the mechanism required that every Sith apprentice spend their entire life preparing to murder their mentor, and every Sith master spend their entire life aware that the person they were training would eventually try to kill them. That was not an unfortunate side effect. That was the feature. The Sith code says through victory, "My chains are broken." In the rule of 2, the only way to break the chains of the apprenticeship is to kill the master. The chains are not metaphor. They are the relationship itself. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The rule of 2 changed the nature of the Sith threat completely. Before Bane, the Sith were detectable. They had armies, empires, public identities as dark side rulers. The Jedi knew what they were dealing with, because the Sith had never tried to hide. After Bane, for exactly 1,000 years, the Sith were invisible. This is worth pausing on. For 10 centuries, the 2 Sith in existence at any given time operated in complete secrecy. No empires, no public declarations, no open confrontations with the Jedi. The Sith tradition moved through the galaxy like a rumor, like a shadow with no source. The Jedi Council declared the Sith extinct after Ruusan. They believed this for 1,000 years. They were completely wrong, and the evidence of that wrongness was hiding in plain sight the entire time, using their own political institutions, their own channels of influence, their own blind spots as cover. The rule of 2 lineage from Bane forward is, for most of its length, Legends material. What that sequence includes, and what makes it worth examining, is evidence of exactly the kind of crisis the rule of 2 was designed to prevent, and, in one case, spectacularly failed to prevent. Darth Gravid was a Sith Lord somewhere in the middle of the thousand-year chain. He began to believe, during his tenure as master, that the Sith philosophy was wrong. Not wrong in the way critics from outside the tradition would say, wrong in the Sith's own terms. He believed that absolute rejection of compassion and attachment was a weakness, not a strength. That the Jedi's emphasis on connection to others represented a genuine power the Sith had abandoned. He began to embrace what any traditional Sith would call the light side. Then he destroyed centuries of accumulated Sith artifacts and knowledge. Libraries, holocrons, records the tradition had been building since Bane's day. His apprentice, a woman named Darth Geen, killed him, as was proper under the rule of two. But the damage was done. The interruption to the lineage's accumulated knowledge was severe enough that the Sith Lord who would eventually emerge as Darth Plagueis had to reconstruct much of what Gravid had destroyed. Much of what Plagueis built his reputation on was archaeology, recovering what had been lost. Think about what that means for the Sith tradition. A thousand-year project of secret knowledge accumulation, designed to give the eventual Sith who emerged from the shadows an overwhelming advantage. And that project was interrupted from within, by a Sith Lord who developed an attachment to the idea of compassion. The tradition that prohibited attachment was nearly destroyed by one of its own members feeling too much. Darth Gravid is not a famous name in Star Wars. Most people who know the Sith well have never heard of him, but he might be the most instructive figure in the entire thousand-year shadow period. The single greatest threat to the rule of two was not the Jedi. It was the possibility that the darkness would not hold. For most of the High Republic era, the period roughly 100 to 500 years before the Phantom Menace, a time the Republic considered its golden age, the Sith were not a known threat. The Jedi Council had declared them extinct after Ruusan, and nothing had emerged in 1,000 years to challenge that assessment. The High Republic published histories in which the Sith were mentioned only as a defeated relic of a more barbaric time. They were wrong. Star Wars: The Acolyte, a Disney Plus series that premiered on June 4, 2024, and ran its first season into that summer before being cancelled later in the same year, showed what was actually happening approximately 100 years before the events of the Phantom Menace. A hidden dark side operator was already active, already dangerous, already training apprentices. The central figure in The Acolyte is a man known as Qimir, referred to throughout the show as the Stranger, played by Manny Jacinto. He is a Sith Lord operating in the High Republic era, keeping himself entirely hidden from the Jedi until a series of murders forces him into the open. His history, as revealed across the first season, is that he was once a Jedi Padawan, was cast out of the Order, and was later found and trained in secret. Fans have taken the show's dying moments as strongly implying that his master was Darth Plagueis himself, though the series was cancelled before that reveal could be confirmed on screen. If that reading holds, and I think it is a reasonable one, it means Plagueis was actively training apprentices a full generation before Palpatine was even born. Qimir would have been Plagueis' student during the High Republic period. Palpatine only became Plagueis' student decades later, in the years leading up to the Phantom Menace, when he was still a young man. At minimum, Plagueis appears to have had more than one apprentice across his career, which means he was bending, if not outright breaking, the rule of two in practice. Whether Qimir was a failed experiment, an abandoned apprentice, or a deliberate exception, the show was cancelled before it could resolve any of it. What remains is a strong implication that the rule of two, even in its most rigid form, was something its practitioners found ways to work around when it suited them. The Jedi in the High Republic era are depicted as confident to the point of blindness. The institutions are functioning. The Republic is prospering. The dark side threat feels like ancient history. That confidence is precisely what the rule of two was designed to exploit. 1,000 years of Sith silence not as absence but as preparation, allowing the Jedi's vigilance to atrophy until the moment the Sith were ready to act. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was built on top of a Sith shrine. This is canon, not a metaphor, not a fan theory, a confirmed detail in current Star Wars material. The original Sith shrine beneath the temple was discovered during its construction, and the Jedi chose to build the temple over it deliberately, placing the galaxy's greatest center of light over the dark side's concentrated presence to contain and suppress the energy radiating from beneath. For 1,000 years, it worked. And then a man named Sheev Palpatine was born. He was born in the middle of the last century before the Battle of Yavin, on the planet Naboo. Everything about his early life was designed, in retrospect, for concealment. Naboo was a peaceful, cultured, somewhat peripheral world, not a place that would draw attention. The Palpatine family was aristocratic, respected, entirely unremarkable in terms of the Force. There was nothing about his origins that would flag him to the Jedi as a potential threat. Darth Plagueis found him anyway. The Sith, in their 1,000 years of darkness, had developed techniques for identifying Force-sensitive individuals without alerting the Jedi. Plagueis tracked Palpatine as a young man and offered him what no Jedi Master would: complete access to dark side knowledge, with no restrictions, no codes, no philosophy of restraint. Palpatine accepted. What followed was decades of dual life. As a student of Plagueis, he learned everything the 1,000-year Sith tradition had accumulated, including the techniques Plagueis had developed around midi-chlorians. The Sith Lord, so the story goes, had discovered a way to influence the microscopic force carriers that existed in every living cell, potentially to manipulate life itself at a biological level. He claimed he could prevent death. Palpatine absorbed all of this and, by his own later boasting, went further with it than his teacher. Meanwhile, as a public figure, he pursued a career in Naboo politics with the same patient, systematic approach that characterized everything about him. Senator, operator, the kind of politician who is present at every meeting without appearing to dominate any of them. Someone who everyone finds reasonable, whose opinions seem calibrated to each listener, who never says the wrong thing in the wrong room. He killed Plagueis in his sleep. The Legends novel Darth Plagueis, written by James Luceno and published in 2012, places this the night before the events of The Phantom Menace. Plagueis drinking with Palpatine, sharing insights, apparently unaware that his student had decided tonight was the moment. The exact canonical date around this remains uncertain, but what matters is the method. No duel, no confrontation, no dramatic final exchange. Plagueis was killed while unconscious, by the person who had been closest to him for decades. That is the rule of two, obeyed to the letter, and betrayed in spirit at the same time. Bane's design demanded the apprentice kill the master. It did not, in the fine print, insist the master be conscious when it happened. Palpatine served as a senator representing Naboo for years, before becoming Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic during the events of the Phantom Menace. He was young for a chancellor, not shockingly young, but young enough to be underestimated by every peer in the Senate who had spent decades believing seniority meant something. The grand plan, the Sith's 1,000-year project compressed into a single political career, unfolded across roughly 30 years. The Trade Federation blockade of Naboo was engineered. The vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum was arranged. The Clone Wars were designed from both sides. Palpatine as the Republic's Supreme Chancellor, Count Dooku as the Separatist leader, both of them reporting to the same Sith Master who was directing the entire conflict toward its intended conclusion. Think about what that actually means. Palpatine was simultaneously the leader of both sides of a galaxy-wide war. He was the Supreme Chancellor directing the Republic's military response. He was the Sith Master directing the Separatist leadership. Every clone trooper killed was killing an enemy he had also created. Every Jedi who died in battle died fighting a war he had manufactured. Every decision made in the Senate, every military strategy proposed by clone commanders, every Separatist advance, all of it flowing through the same set of hands, toward the same endpoint. No one knew. In the universe of the story, only a handful of beings across the entire galaxy ever knew Palpatine's true identity as Darth Sidious. The Sith had spent 1,000 years making that possible. The infiltration so deep, the patience so absolute, that the galaxy's greatest evil was also the galaxy's most trusted public servant. There is not, in my opinion, a cleaner or more chilling illustration of what a patient tradition can do than that. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a scene in the Rebels episode Twin Suns from the 3rd season, aired on March 18, 2017, that people who watched it still find difficult to describe without something changing in their voices. Darth Maul has spent years on Tatooine, driven by one purpose: finding Obi-Wan Kenobi. He has manipulated the young Jedi Ezra Bridger into unwittingly leading him there. He steps out into the desert at night and calls for Kenobi to face him, and Obi-Wan appears. Their duel lasts seconds, 3 movements, maybe 4. Obi-Wan wins. Maul dies in Obi-Wan's arms, asking about the Chosen One. When Obi-Wan confirms that a Chosen One is coming, Maul seems almost at peace. He says that Luke will avenge them both. Then he is gone. To understand why that scene lands the way it does, you need to know the full arc of Maul's life, which is, among other things, one of the most extraordinary survival stories in Star Wars. Darth Maul was born in the middle of the last century before the Battle of Yavin on the planet Dathomir, home of the Night Sisters, a clan of dark side practitioners who existed separately from the formal Sith tradition. His mother was Mother Talzin, leader of the Night Sisters. Palpatine, who had a long history of identifying and claiming powerful Force sensitives for his own purposes, took the young Maul and trained him in secret. Maul was never meant to be a Sith Lord in the full Rule of Two sense. He was a weapon, a living missile shaped by years of training into pure aggression. Palpatine did not love him, did not plan to elevate him to equal partnership, did not see him as a partner in the grand plan. He was efficient. He served a purpose. That purpose was demonstrated in the Phantom Menace, set 32 years before the Battle of Yavin. Maul was dispatched to Naboo, tracked down Qui-Gon Jinn and the young Queen Amidala, and fought a duel that ended with the first Jedi killed by a Sith in approximately 1,000 years. Qui-Gon Jinn fell to Maul's double-bladed lightsaber, and then Maul fell to Obi-Wan Kenobi, who bisected him at the waist and dropped him into a reactor shaft. For most stories, that is where the story ends. Maul survived through something the narrative never quite dignifies with a comfortable explanation. He survived through hatred. The darkness kept him alive. His broken, bisected body fell on Lotho Minor, a planet used as a garbage dump, and he built crude spider leg prosthetics from scrap metal and lost his mind over the intervening years. He existed in a state of barely functional madness, driven by nothing but the need for revenge against the man who had cut him in half. His brother Savage Opress eventually tracked Maul down and brought him home to Dathomir. Mother Talzin used Night Sister magic, a tradition of dark side power distinct from formal Sith training, to restore Maul's mind and provide him with functional cybernetic legs. He came back from somewhere most beings would not have come back from, and he came back coherent. What he built afterward was not a Sith empire. It was something more personal and more dangerous. The Shadow Collective, an alliance of criminal organizations including the Mandalorian Death Watch faction, the Pike Syndicate, Black Sun, and the Hutt clans, gave Maul actual power independent of Palpatine. He took Mandalore. He wielded the Darksaber, an ancient black-bladed Mandalorian weapon that represented the right to rule that world. He became a genuine political force. And then Darth Sidious arrived personally to correct all of that. The confrontation is one of the most brutal sequences in the Clone Wars. Sidious killed Savage Opress. He then fought Maul and won, and then kept Maul alive deliberately because Maul's mother, Mother Talzin, was a genuine threat to Sidious's plans, and a living Maul was useful bait. Even in punishing his former student, Sidious was using him. That is not the behavior of someone who values another person's life. That is the behavior of someone for whom every other being in the galaxy is either a tool or an obstacle. It is also, honestly, the moment I think Maul understood, for the first time, what he had actually served all those years. Maul spent his remaining decades rebuilt one more time, not from Night Sister magic, but from pure tenacity. He eventually became the hidden leader of the criminal organization Crimson Dawn, his identity revealed in Solo, a Star Wars story, in 2018. He remained a figure of enormous danger, but never again approached the political power he had briefly held. And then came the desert, Tatooine, the duel that lasted seconds. The reason Obi-Wan won so quickly was not simply that he was the better duelist. It was that he had been watching. He had spent years in exile in a desert, in quiet, in what looked like doing nothing, and was actually the cultivation of a different kind of attention. He recognized Maul's fighting stance and identified the specific attack Maul had used to kill Qui-Gon. He saw the opening before Maul had committed to the move. He countered it before it fully developed. Maul had been shaped by rage into a weapon, and in the end, that weapon met a man who had put his rage down and was simply present. Count Dooku is, in several ways, the most honest person in the prequel trilogy. That sounds wrong. He is Sidious's second in command. He leads the faction trying to destroy the Republic, He is directly responsible for a war that kills millions. These things are true, and yet within the story's logic, measured against the people around him, Dooku says the things that are accurate more often than almost anyone else in the trilogy's political world. He tells Padme Amidala, in Attack of the Clones, that the Republic is corrupt and that the Senate is under the control of a Sith Lord. He is telling her the exact truth. She does not believe him. The audience is not supposed to believe him, and the entire arc of the prequel trilogy is the gradual confirmation that he was right about all of it. That is a strange thing to build a villain around. Dooku was born roughly a century before the Battle of Yavin on Serenno, an aristocratic world. He was identified as Force-sensitive early and taken by the Jedi Order, where he was trained as a Padawan under Yoda himself. He became a Jedi Master, one of the finest swordsmen the Order had produced, a man respected within Jedi circles and across the Republic. And then he became disillusioned. The disillusionment had specific causes. The Jedi Order had, over centuries, grown increasingly intertwined with the Republic Senate. In Dooku's view, this was corruption. The Jedi had stopped being guardians of justice and had become instruments of Senate power, which was to say instruments of the very corruption they were supposed to counterbalance. His former Padawan, Qui-Gon Jinn, had shared some of this skepticism and was himself a difficult figure within the Order, someone who followed the living Force rather than the Council's directives. Qui-Gon was killed by Darth Maul in the events of the Phantom Menace. Dooku was already pulling away from the Order before that, but the death of his former Padawan seems to have been a tipping point. He left the Jedi Order, returned to Serenno, reclaimed his title as Count. Sidious was waiting. Dooku's fall was not a single moment but a slow slide, sped along by the death of his beloved master and, in one of the more devastating pieces of newer canon, the death of another Jedi close to him. Master Yaddle was killed by Dooku himself in a confrontation depicted in the Disney Plus animated anthology, Tales of the Jedi. Dooku had, by that point, already begun serving Sidious. Yaddle worked out what he had become and confronted him. She died as a result. What Dooku did that day, and how quickly he had to hide it from the rest of the Council, seems to have been the point of no return for him. He took the name Darth Tyrannus not long after. As Tyrannus, Dooku became the public face of the separatist movement, the Confederacy of Independent Systems, while secretly directing it as Sidious's agent. He was the one who commissioned the clone army through Jango Fett, using his Tyrannus identity to contact the Kaminoans. The Clone Wars, running roughly 22 to 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, were, on one level, a genuine political conflict. Worlds with legitimate grievances with the corrupt Senate did break away, and the separatist cause had real followers with real reasons. But the conflict was also, simultaneously, a mechanism, a carefully designed crisis whose purpose was to give Palpatine the emergency powers necessary to transform the Republic into an empire, and to deplete and demoralize the Jedi Order into a position where it could be destroyed. Dooku, despite being the second most powerful Sith in the galaxy, was also being used. He believed Sidious intended to make him emperor. Sidious had already identified Anakin Skywalker as Dooku's eventual replacement. Dooku was useful precisely as long as he was useful. He knew enough of Sith tradition to understand that his master would not be reluctant to discard him when the time came. He simply believed he would see it coming. He did not. In the opening sequence of Revenge of the Sith, after a space battle above Coruscant in the final year of the war, Anakin Skywalker defeated Dooku in a duel aboard the Separatist flagship. Dooku was disarmed, and Palpatine, the man Dooku had served for nearly 2 decades, told Anakin to kill him. Dooku looked at Palpatine in that moment with what seems, in retrospect, like the first genuine surprise he had ever registered. He had miscalculated. He had known, intellectually, that the rule of 2 demanded a replacement. He had presumably believed he would manage the transition on his own terms. He was wrong. He died on his knees, executed by a young man he had fought twice before, on the orders of a man he had trusted. That is the rule of 2 in action, not as theory, as practice. The Clone Wars, which ran roughly from 22 to 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, are worth examining beyond their surface function as a conflict between the Republic and the Separatists, because the Clone Wars are, in Sith history, the most ambitious single operation the tradition ever attempted. A manufactured crisis of galaxy-wide scale designed to accomplish 3 separate things simultaneously, all of them necessary for the grand plan to succeed. The first was the destruction of the Jedi Order, not through direct confrontation. The Sith had tried direct confrontation with the Jedi for 7,000 years and had never won a clean, permanent victory. The Clone Wars were designed to exhaust the Jedi instead, to spread them across thousands of worlds, attached to military commands, fighting a war that had no natural end, to put Jedi in positions where they were making tactical military decisions, rather than operating as peacekeepers, which was what they were trained for, to place them in chains of command that would become killing chains when Order 66 was issued. The second was the justification for emergency powers. Palpatine needed a legal mechanism to transform his supreme chancellorship into an emperor's office. He needed the Senate to grant him powers that the Republic Constitution did not technically permit. He needed a crisis frightening enough, sustained enough, and close enough to Coruscant to convince a democratic body that extraordinary measures were necessary. The Clone Wars provided exactly that. Each separatist advance, each new theater of the war, gave Palpatine another reason to request another expansion of his emergency authority. By the time of Revenge of the Sith, he had been accumulating those expansions for 3 years. The Senate that voted to declare the Empire had already, incrementally, handed Palpatine everything he needed. The third was the creation of Darth Vader. That is the one most people understand intuitively, but rarely examine directly. The Clone Wars were not just a mechanism for breaking the Jedi Order as an institution. They were a mechanism for breaking Anakin Skywalker as a person. 3 years of war, of watching people die, of making decisions with consequences measured in thousands of lives, of being separated from the woman he loved in violation of everything the Jedi Code permitted him to admit he felt. 3 years of that did to Anakin what Palpatine needed it to do. It made him desperate. It made him feel the weight of every loss as a personal failure. It made the dream of a power that could prevent death feel not like fantasy, but like the most urgent possible necessity. Palpatine was present throughout all 3 years, managing the crisis, offering counsel, maintaining his fiction as Anakin's friend and mentor. He was the one constant in Anakin's war. The Jedi Council was skeptical of Anakin's ambitions. The Senate was remote and political. Obi-Wan was a peer and occasionally a critic. Palpatine was the man who listened without judgment and always had the right thing to say. That is not an accident. That is a cultivation project executed over more than a decade. The specific genius of Sidious, and it is genuine, the most honest response to this plan is that it required a mind of extraordinary capability, was that he did not just manipulate events, he managed relationships. He understood that trust, once built, is extraordinarily difficult to withdraw even when warning signs appear. Anakin had years of Palpatine as a warm, supportive, trustworthy presence before the Opera House conversation. Those years were the investment that made the manipulation work. Anakin did not trust Palpatine because he was naive. He trusted him because Palpatine had spent that time earning that trust through consistent behavior. That is why the revelation in Revenge of the Sith that Palpatine was the Sith Lord is psychologically so devastating for Anakin. It is not just that Palpatine was lying. It is that the only relationship in Anakin's life that felt safe and consistent and without the Jedi's emotional restrictions was also the deepest manipulation. Everything warm was also a trap. The thing that made the dark side feel like refuge was designed to feel exactly that way. Let that sit for a moment. The Sith philosophy says that attachment is weakness, but Palpatine's manipulation of Anakin worked precisely because it created attachment. Specifically, attachment to the one person who was willing to say your feelings are real and I will help you act on them. Palpatine used the language of compassion and loyalty to seduce a man who had been told for his entire adult life that compassion and loyalty were dangerous. He told Anakin his love for Padme was his strength, and in doing so, he turned that strength into the lever that pulled Anakin into the dark. This is not the behavior of someone who actually believed the Sith code. A Sith Lord who genuinely believed passion was strength and attachment was weakness would not have spent years cultivating a relationship based on loyalty and warmth. Palpatine did not believe the code. He used it. He used the Jedi version of it, the suppress everything doctrine, to create the wound, and he used the Sith version of it, the feel everything doctrine, to offer the cure. He was operating both philosophies simultaneously as tools, attached to neither. That is perhaps the most terrifying thing about Palpatine. He was not a true believer in anything. He was a man who had studied both traditions deeply enough to use them, who had transcended the code he preached by understanding that the code, like everything else in the galaxy, was a tool to be wielded by whoever was strong enough to pick it up. There is a moment in Revenge of the Sith that almost nobody talks about, and it is the moment that carries the entire weight of Anakin Skywalker's fall. It is not the scene in the council chamber. It is not the scene on Mustafar. It is a small reaction, barely more than a held shot, that happens while Anakin is still ostensibly a Jedi. He is sitting in the council chamber, having been appointed to the council by Palpatine over the council's objections. He has been denied the rank of master, told to his face that the appointment was political, that his presence on the council was not the validation he had been led to believe. And he sits there, does not argue, does not storm out. He sits there and takes it. The camera holds on his face. He has already lost. That is the Anakin who makes the choice he makes, not the Anakin of his best moments, not the brilliant pilot, the capable commander, the genuinely kind person who emerges in the Clone Wars series. This Anakin, the one who has been told, one time too many, that he is not enough. The Chosen One prophecy is worth examining here. Ancient Jedi texts had predicted that a being born of the Force, no father, a midi-chlorian count higher than anyone had ever recorded, would bring balance to the Force by destroying the Sith. Qui-Gon found Anakin on Tatooine at 9 years old and immediately believed he was that person. The Council was skeptical. They trained him anyway. By the time of Revenge of the Sith, the prophecy had become part of Anakin's identity in a way that was almost destabilizing. He had been told he was special from childhood. He had been trained as someone exceptional, and he had spent his entire Jedi career being simultaneously elevated by that status and restricted by the Order's codes. No attachment, no fear, no love, no ordinary human need. The gap between what he was told he was and what the Order was willing to allow him to be was enormous. Sidious, who had been watching and cultivating that gap for years, understood it better than Anakin did. The Force visions of Padme dying in childbirth started roughly a year before Revenge of the Sith. They were not idle fears. Anakin had watched his mother die after having Force visions of her in pain, and he had arrived too late. The visions were real. He knew they were real, and the Jedi Order's answer to his terror was, essentially, to let go, to accept loss, to detach from his love for his wife, who was secretly pregnant with his children, and trust the Force. Palpatine had a different answer. The manipulation was long-running and surgically precise. Palpatine had been Anakin's unofficial mentor and friend since Anakin was a child of 9. He had attended Anakin's life events, offered advice, been present at moments of doubt and uncertainty with exactly the right words. For years, he had been building the relationship that would allow this specific conversation, this one night at the opera, this story about Plagueis the Wise, to work. The story about Plagueis was the fruit of a long cultivation project. When Mace Windu went to arrest Palpatine, having received confirmation from Anakin that Palpatine was the Sith Lord they had been searching for, Anakin followed, not to help Windu, not quite to help Palpatine. He followed because he could not accept a world in which the person who had promised him a way to save Padme was dead before fulfilling that promise. Windu defeated Palpatine, had him at saber point, and Anakin cut off Windu's sword hand. He did not choose the dark side in that moment. He chose the chance that Plagueis' power was real and that Palpatine could teach it to him. The dark side was the price of that choice, not the thing he was choosing. Sidious's lightning finished Windu. Anakin knelt. He took the name Darth Vader. The tragedy of the next hours is compressed in the films, but devastating regardless of its pacing. Vader was sent to Mustafar to kill the Separatist leadership, which he did, methodically. The same person who had spoken about peace and justice, executing unarmed politicians in a conference room because his master told him to. Padme followed him. Their confrontation on Mustafar is one of the most painful scenes in the franchise because both of them are telling the truth. She tells him he has changed. He tells her everything he has done is for her. Both of those things are accurate, and neither of them helps. Obi-Wan had hidden himself on Padme's ship. His arrival confirmed for Vader what he had suspected in his darkest interpretation of the situation. that she had chosen the Jedi over him. He force-choked his wife and turned to fight his brother. They fought across the volcanic landscape of Mustafar. Obi-Wan ended it by warning Vader not to attempt a specific attack. Vader attempted it anyway. Obi-Wan severed his legs and his remaining arm. Vader burned on the lava bank. Palpatine arrived and rebuilt him in the armor that would be his prison and his identity for the next 23 years. The suit was deliberately painful. Sidious had, in the reading many fans favor, engineered it to restrict Vader's full potential, because a Vader in perfect health might have become powerful enough to rival the Emperor himself. The suffering was a mechanism. The anger the suffering produced was fuel, and the fuel kept the dark side burning hot enough to be useful. Anakin Skywalker was not dead, but he would not be present again for a very long time. The Sith holocron deserves its own moment here, because it is the physical object that explains how a tradition survives for 25,000 years across civilizational collapses, planet-wide destructions, and the systematic erasure of its practitioners. A Sith holocron is a pyramid-shaped repository of knowledge, three-sided, as opposed to the cube-shaped holocrons used by the Jedi. Inside, encoded through the Force, is a gatekeeper, an imprint of the holocron's creator that can interact with whoever opens the device, answer questions, transmit knowledge, and assess whether the user is strong enough in the dark side to access the more dangerous material within. These objects are extraordinarily durable. They are designed to outlast their creators by centuries. They are designed to be found by exactly the right kind of person. Someone hungry enough, strong enough, desperate enough to crack the device's psychic lock and receive what is inside. The Sith holocron is the tradition's immune system, a way of ensuring that even if every living Sith is killed, the knowledge survives, waiting in pyramidal form on some shelf in a ruined temple, until the next person comes looking. That is why Darth Bane's work in recovering ancient texts at the Brotherhood's Academy on Korriban was so significant. The texts he found there were thousands of years old. They had survived the Great Hyperspace War, the New Sith Wars, multiple purges of Sith libraries. They contained insights about the dark side that the living tradition had lost or misunderstood, and Bane used those insights to recognize the structural failures in everything around him. He did not invent the rule of two from nothing. He read it from the accumulated wisdom of people who had died learning the same lessons in different ways. The Sith tradition, at its most functional, was a conversation across time. Masters left knowledge for students they would never meet. Students absorbed what they could and added their own discoveries to the pool. The catastrophe of Darth Gravid was so severe precisely because what he destroyed was not just artifacts, but conversations. The accumulated testimony of centuries of Sith experience, irreplaceable threads in an argument that had been building for 1,000 years. Darth Plagueis, who inherited the damaged lineage some generations after Gravid, spent decades reconstructing what had been lost through archaeological work, darkside research, and the kind of patient investigation that his moon nature, the moon species being known for their financial and analytical acuity, made him well suited for. By the time Palpatine found him, Plagueis was probably the most comprehensively educated Sith Lord in history, having reconstructed knowledge from multiple eras of the tradition. He was also, as the single most important Sith fact of the prequel era confirms, not careful enough about who he let sit across the dinner table from him. The empire that Palpatine declared before the Galactic Senate at the end of the Clone Wars was not maintained without cost. Order 66, the command issued to every clone trooper simultaneously, worked through the inhibitor chips implanted in clones during their gestation on Kamino. These behavioral modification devices overrode free will when activated, turning every clone against their Jedi generals galaxy-wide. The Clone Wars television series, specifically its final season, showed the execution of Order 66 from the perspective of Ahsoka Tano, a former Jedi Padawan who was not technically a Jedi at the time the order was issued, which is the specific technical reason she survived it. A small number of clone commanders managed to resist, some through removed or disabled chips. Captain Rex was among them. Operation Nightfall was Darth Vader's personal contribution to the Purge's beginning. He led the 501st Legion into the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. He killed everyone inside, including the children, the younglings who had not yet been assigned a master, who did not understand what was happening, who came to Vader with trust rather than weapons. The Darth Vader comic series, written by Charles Soule and launched in 2017, covered the earliest years of Vader's existence as the Empire's enforcer and remains one of the most thoughtful examinations of who Vader was in those years. What Soul understood, which the films themselves only imply, is that the relationship between Vader's suffering and his power was not metaphorical. The dark side, for Vader, was fed directly by grief and rage. Every reminder of what he had lost made him more dangerous. The suit was not just life support. It was a mechanism for maintaining the psychological state that kept him functional as Sidious's instrument. The Inquisitorius, the organization of dark side hunters Sidious created to pursue surviving Jedi, operated under Vader's direct authority. They were not Sith. The rule of two explicitly forbade more than two Sith in existence. The Inquisitors were fallen Jedi, taken and broken, and remade as instruments, given red lightsabers with spinning combat mechanisms, given enough dark side training to track and fight Jedi, but not enough to pose independent threats to Vader or Sidious. They were deliberately limited, deliberately kept weaker than they might have been, because the Emperor had no interest in creating rivals. Vader's castle on Mustafar, which appears in Rogue One and is examined extensively in the comics, is one of the most significant physical artifacts in this entire history, built atop an ancient Sith locus, a concentration of dark side energy. The castle was designed with the help of the spirit of Lord Mammon, an ancient Sith architect whose essence was contained in his mask, which Sidious gave to Vader as a gift. Mommon's design was not purely aesthetic. The castle was, in one of its stated purposes in the comic, an attempt to harness the dark side energy in Mustafar's core as a mechanism by which Vader might reach through death itself and contact Padme on the other side. Vader spent years attempting exactly that. The portal opened. Whatever he found there did not give him Padme, but the attempt speaks to who Vader was beneath the armor. A man who had done everything Sidious asked, and had still not achieved the one thing the darkness had promised him. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim, Maul rebuilt whatever he could. After his defeat by Sidious during the Clone Wars, Maul gradually reconstructed a position of power. By the time of Rebels, set roughly a handful of years before the Battle of Yavin, he was looking for a specific kind of resolution. He had lost everything. His obsession had narrowed to a single point: Obi-Wan Kenobi, the man who had cut him in half, the man who represented the sum of everything that had been taken from him. When he died in that desert, in seconds, in the arms of the man he had hated for decades, his last words were about hope, that Luke would avenge them, that the Chosen One would end what neither of them had been able to end. Obi-Wan held him and closed his eyes when it was over. Whatever Maul had been, weapon, Sith Lord, crime boss, survivor, he died being held by someone who treated his death as a loss worth mourning. That is a version of dignity the dark side had never offered him while he was alive. There is a version of the story that ends with the Emperor winning. It requires only one small change. Darth Vader watches Luke die and does not move. He is standing there. He is capable. He could throw the Emperor down the shaft the same way he eventually does. All that is required for the dark side to complete its victory is for Vader to do nothing, which is what he has been doing for 23 years. That he moves is the central mystery of the original trilogy. Not will the heroes win, we always believe they will. But why does Vader move? What tips the balance, in a man who has served darkness faithfully for over 2 decades, toward the one act that changes everything? The answer is not Luke's Force sensitivity. It is not some abstract pull of the light side. It is specific and human. Vader watches his son being tortured to death by the man who promised Anakin Skywalker he would save the people Anakin loved. And something in whatever remained of Anakin recognized the specific shape of that betrayal. That the darkness had never been going to give him what he wanted. That the path of power had led to exactly this moment. Watching his child die at the hands of his master. He lifts the Emperor. He throws him into the reactor shaft. He is struck by the lightning in the process, fatally damaging the life support systems that have kept him alive for 23 years. He asks Luke to take off the mask. He wants to see his son with his own eyes, not through the mechanical sensors of the helmet, but directly, as a human being. He dies as Anakin Skywalker. The Chosen One prophecy, which had been treated as ambiguous, or possibly already failed throughout the prequel era, was fulfilled in this moment. Anakin destroyed both Sith Lords then alive. He brought balance to the Force by eliminating the darkness that had dominated it for a generation. George Lucas has said in more than one interview over the years that the core story of Star Wars, from his perspective, was always the story of Anakin Skywalker. And the end is a man choosing, one time, after decades of wrong choices, to be his child's father instead of his master's servant. That is the weight the dark side had accumulated across 1,000 years of the rule of two. All the wars, all the empires, all the betrayals, all the death, compressed into a single choice made by a dying man in an elevator shaft on a space station. It is a very small moment to carry so much, but it carries it. The thing about Darth Sidious is that he planned for everything except being genuinely killed. Sidious had spent decades understanding death as a solvable problem. Plagueis' research had pointed the way. The ability to influence midi-chlorians, to manipulate the Force at a biological level. Sidious took that research and extended it in a direction Plagueis apparently had not fully explored: the transfer of consciousness. If the body died but the mind survived in the Force, could the mind be moved to a new vessel? On a hidden world called Exegol, buried in the unknown regions behind hyperspace routes so chaotic and dangerous that they were essentially unnavigable without a specific device called a Sith Wayfinder, Sidious had been building an insurance policy. The Sith Eternal, not the Sith Order, not a collection of Sith Lords, but a cult of non-Force-sensitive true believers who had devoted their lives and labor to maintaining what Sidious had built there, had been constructing a fleet, not a standard military fleet. Star destroyers equipped with weapons capable of destroying a planet from orbit, a final order large enough to make the Death Star obsolete. When Vader threw him down the shaft over Xendor at the end of the Galactic Civil War, Sidious's essence transferred to a cloned body he had prepared on Exegol. The body was imperfect. The clone's form began to fail almost immediately, but it kept him alive. He had time. Supreme Leader Snoke, who appeared in the sequel trilogy as the shadowy authority figure commanding the First Order, was not a Sith Lord. He was a strand cast, a biological creation engineered by Sidious and grown on Exegol, designed to serve as a puppet proxy. Through Snoke, Sidious directed the First Order's rise in the 3 decades between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. Through Snoke, Sidious began the long work of cultivating the next piece he needed: Ben Solo. Ben was the son of Han Solo and Leia Organa, born a few years after the Battle of Yavin. He trained as a Jedi under Luke Skywalker. Sidious, operating through Snoke, had been working on Ben since childhood, a distant influence whispering through the Force, amplifying the doubts and fears that came with carrying Vader's legacy in his blood. When Luke, perceiving the darkness growing in Ben, briefly considered killing him in his sleep, a thought Luke immediately rejected. But Ben witnessed the moment of it. The damage was irreversible. Ben destroyed Luke's Jedi temple. He joined Snoke as Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren was not a Sith. He belonged to the Knights of Ren, a dark side warrior group with no formal connection to the Rule of Two tradition. He was powerful, conflicted, and operating under manipulation he was not aware of. In The Last Jedi, he killed Snoke, believing he was breaking free of control, seizing his own destiny. He was doing exactly what Sidious wanted. Snoke's death removed a puppet Sidious was done needing. The 30-year period between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens is, in Sith history, the most carefully concealed operation the tradition ever ran. More concealed than the 1,000 years of shadow, because at least during that period the Sith were hiding. In the aftermath of Xendor, Sidious was supposed to be dead. The Sith were supposed to be extinct. The concealment was not strategic caution. It was operating behind the cover of apparent total defeat. The First Order, which rose from the ashes of the Empire in the unknown regions, was publicly understood as a remnant military faction, a collection of Imperial loyalists who had retreated rather than surrendered. It had genuine believers, people who thought the Empire's vision of order was correct, and that the New Republic's lenient treatment of the Imperial remnant was a mistake. But above them was Snoke, and above Snoke was Sidious. The Strandcast Supreme Leader was a biological puppet, but he was a convincing one. Snoke had genuine Force sensitivity. The strand-casting process that produced him included enough of Sidious's genetic material that he could touch the Force, manipulate it, teach it. He was a real dark side practitioner in a functional sense, even if he was a creation rather than a person. His power over the Force was genuine. His authority over the First Order was genuinely exercised. The manipulation was not that Snoke was fake, it was that Snoke's will was never his own. Ben Solo was Snoke's most significant project and his ultimate failure. The seduction of the grandson of Darth Vader, the inheritor of the most powerful Force lineage in the galaxy's recent history, was something Sidious had been planning since before Ben was born. The combination of Vader's Force potential and the Skywalker bloodline made Ben something extraordinary, and Sidious needed someone extraordinary. What made Ben's fall so painful to watch across the sequel trilogy is that it did not come from weakness. It came from being unloved in a way that was specifically his own. His father Han was warm but absent, unable to fully understand a Force-sensitive son. His mother Leia was powerful and committed, but her commitments kept pulling her away. His uncle Luke, who understood the Force better than either of his parents, looked at the darkness in Ben one night and reached for his lightsaber. He did not go through with it. He stopped himself immediately, horrified. But Ben woke up in that fraction of a second to the sight of his teacher standing over him with a weapon. The damage that moment did is incalculable. Ben was not training under a master who saw him as a person. He was, in his own terror, training under someone who had already written his death. Snoke's voice in his head, whispering for years, suddenly had material to work with that no amount of patient love could easily counter. Ben did not fall to the dark side because he was evil. He fell because he was afraid, and the people who loved him had not been able to protect him from his own fear. Kylo Ren is, for my money, the most honest presentation of the dark side in the sequel trilogy because he never pretends to enjoy it. He is not Vader's theatrical menace or Sidious's cool manipulation. He is someone in enormous psychological pain, doing terrible things, and hating himself for them, unable to stop, because stopping would require admitting that every choice he has made since destroying Luke's temple was wrong. The mask is not armor against the world. It is armor against the mirror. He cannot look at himself, so he builds something to look at instead. When he kills Han Solo in The Force Awakens, he does it trying to resolve the conflict inside himself. He believes, or tells himself he believes, that if he commits fully enough, the conflict will end. It does not end, he cries after. Snoke sees this and views it as weakness. Snoke is wrong about almost everything that matters about Kylo Ren, which is why Kylo can kill him in The Last Jedi and not lose any significant capability. Snoke never understood what he was working with. He was trying to sculpt a Sith in the traditional mold. Cold, ruthless, committed to power above all. And what he had was a young man who was grieving and could not stop. There is one more idea from the sequel trilogy that is worth putting inside the Sith story properly, because it changes what the ending on Exegol actually means. The films call it a dyad in the Force. Two beings, in different bodies, whose connection to the Force is functionally shared. One life running through two people. It has, per the sources, happened maybe once in a generation across all of galactic history, and the Sith archives had, for millennia, treated it as almost mythological. Rey and Ben Solo were a dyad. That is why Kylo Ren could reach across the galaxy and speak to Rey in a hut on Ahch-To. That is why Rey could pull a lightsaber to her hand from Ben's fingers on Starkiller Base. That is why they could hurt each other over impossible distances and heal each other in the same way. Sidious, once he understood what they were, wanted the dyad the way he had wanted everything else. Not as a relationship, as a battery. 2 lives worth of Force energy funneled into a single decrepit body would have been enough, in his calculation, to restore him fully and give him the strength to power the Sith Eternal Fleet indefinitely. That is the last irony of the Sith. Their tradition had spent 25,000 years despising attachment as weakness, and in the final hours of the last Sith Emperor, the thing he wanted more than anything was a bond between 2 people. The thing he wanted to steal was the one thing the code told him he should never have wanted at all. Rey and Ben Solo saved each other on Exegol. The dyad, in the end, protected both of them, and the Sith, at last, lost to the exact quality of connection they had spent thousands of years denying was real. The Rise of Skywalker showed the endgame of Sidious's final play. He revealed himself through galaxy-wide broadcast and through the manipulation of events that brought Rey to Exegol. Rey was his granddaughter, the offspring of a son he had created, which meant she carried sufficient Force potential for a consciousness transfer to work. He attempted to consume her, and specifically to consume the dyad she shared with Ben, to move into her body and continue. It did not work. Rey, with the voices of every Jedi who had come before, channeled through her in the Force, deflected Sidious's Force lightning back at him using 2 lightsabers, both from the Skywalker family. He was destroyed. The Sith Eternal's fleet, which had launched and was threatening the galaxy, was destroyed by a civilian fleet that had responded to Lando Calrissian's call. Ben Solo, redeemed by a Force echo of his father, gave his remaining life force to resurrect Rey and died as Ben, not as Kylo Ren. The Battle of Exegol ended the Sith. The rule of 2 lineage that Darth Bane established roughly 1,000 years before was finally broken. The 1,000-year project was over. The last Sith Emperor, who had killed his master in his sleep and manipulated his way to ruling the galaxy and built a resurrection plan in the unknown regions and corrupted every Force-sensitive being he could reach, was gone. The Sith history, taken from its beginning, is a story about what a philosophy produces when followed to its logical conclusion. The original Dark Jedi, who were exiled from the Order, did not begin as monsters. They were people who disagreed about the Force, who were defeated in that disagreement, and who were given their lives and sent away. They found a species that called them gods and built an empire. That empire collapsed because its own rulers could not stop competing with each other. The survivors tried new approaches. Every approach eventually collapsed, for the same reason or variations on it, until Darth Bane found a way to compress the tradition into something that could survive. 2 people, patient, hidden, accumulating power across 1,000 years. That 1,000-year project produced Palpatine, a man who might genuinely be the most capable political and strategic mind the galaxy ever contained, who saw farther and planned longer and understood power more completely than anyone around him, who spent 30 years building toward a single moment and executed it flawlessly, and who, at the end of everything, was destroyed by a young woman he had not sufficiently accounted for, and by the echoes of all the people his tradition had tried to extinguish. There are 2 objects called Sith Wayfinders. They are small pyramid-shaped devices. They function as navigational tools, specifically designed to guide a ship through the hyperspace routes of the unknown regions to Exegol, a world hidden behind routes so chaotic that conventional navigation fails completely. Without a wayfinder, Exegol is effectively unreachable. With one, it is only dangerous. One wayfinder belonged to Vader. It was found on Mustafar, in the ruins of his castle, by Rey. The other belonged to Sidious himself, and was hidden in the wreckage of the second Death Star on the ocean moon Kef Bir. Those objects are, in the physical world, the last tangible evidence that Palpatine's plan extended across decades, that he had prepared for defeat, had built a refuge, had arranged the navigation keys before anyone else knew a refuge was necessary. The Wayfinder as an object also carries a specific symbolic weight. It is not a weapon. It is not a source of power. It is a key to a hiding place. The most powerful Sith Lord in history, who had commanded galaxies and ruled for decades, who had manipulated everyone around him into believing whatever he needed them to believe. At the end of everything, his most important tool was a navigational device to reach the place where he had prepared to wait. Not to triumph, to survive, to wait for another chance. That is the dark side at its most honest. Not power, persistence. The refusal to accept any outcome as permanent. The compulsion to continue, to rebuild, to find another lever. Sidious's resurrection plan was not courage or strength. It was the inability to let go. The same inability that had driven Maul to build crude legs from garbage on a trash planet, that had kept Exar Kun's spirit imprisoned in temples for 4,000 years, that had held Ajunta Pal's ghost in his tomb waiting for someone to come looking. The dark side does not offer peace. It offers continuation. One more moment, one more chance, one more attempt to win a game that has no winning condition. The Sith Code says the Force shall free me. After 25,000 years, what freedom looked like, to every practitioner of the dark side, was more power. And after every acquisition of more power, freedom remained just ahead, never quite in hand, always one more betrayal away. The Sith Code is real. Passion is strength. Strength is power. But the Code does not say anything about what power is for. And every Sith Lord in this entire history, from Ajunta Pal, to Naga Sadow, to Exar Kun, to Revan, to Traya, to Bane, to Sidious, died or failed or was destroyed, not because they lacked power, but because they did not know what to do with it once they had it. The Sith Code is the clearest window into what the Sith actually believed about themselves, and it is worth reading slowly. Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion I gain strength. Through strength I gain power. Through power I gain victory. Through victory my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. 6 lines. And the first thing to notice is that this is not a code about cruelty. It is not about hatred as an end in itself. It is a statement about the nature of reality. That peace is not genuine. That suppressing passion does not create wisdom, but only concealment. That freedom is earned through the accumulation of power, rather than granted through surrender of desire. In the Sith worldview, the Jedi are not wise. They are imprisoned. They have mistaken their chains for enlightenment. The contrast with the Jedi Code is precise and deliberate. Where the Jedi Code says there is no passion, there is serenity. The Sith Code says passion is the only honest thing. Where the Jedi seek peace, the Sith deny peace exists. These are not compatible worldviews with some middle ground between them. They represent 2 fundamentally different answers to the question of what the Force is for. What makes the Sith Code genuinely interesting, rather than merely evil, is that it contains a real insight buried under the violence of its conclusions. The Jedi Order of the prequel era did suppress emotion in ways that created the very damage it was meant to prevent. Anakin Skywalker was told to let go of his fear for Padme, and the suppression of that fear created the conditions for Palpatine's manipulation. The Jedi's insistence on detachment produced a tradition that could not accommodate ordinary human need, which meant that any Jedi with ordinary human attachments was already, by definition, in conflict with their own order. The Sith, reading this, were not wrong to identify it as a structural problem. Where they went wrong was in the solution. The Jedi said suppress everything. The Sith said weaponize everything. Neither answer is adequate, and every tragedy in this history can be traced, in some form, to what happens when people choose one of those 2 insufficient answers as their entire philosophy. There is also the matter of how Sith make their weapons. In current canon, Sith Lords cannot grow their own Kyber crystals. Kyber crystals, the living stones that power lightsabers, are attuned to the light side of the Force. They grow in alignment with the light, and they resist the dark. A Sith who wants a red lightsaber must take one from a Jedi they have defeated and do something to it that the canon sources describe, deliberately and without irony, as torture. The process is called bleeding the crystal. A Sith takes the crystal and channels intense negative emotion into it. Pain, hatred, grief, rage. The crystal resists. It fights back. If the Sith is strong enough to override the crystal's resistance, it eventually cries, a term used in official sources, and turns red, permanently altered by the suffering that was forced into it. The red color is not aesthetic preference. It is scar tissue. The crystal has been broken by the dark side, and the red is the evidence of what was done to it. That world building was popularized in the Ahsoka novel by E.K. Johnston, and it is one of the most quietly devastating pieces of canon material to arrive in the Disney era. The signature weapon of the Sith is not simply a lightsaber with a different color. It is a living object that was hurt into submission. The Sith are, at the most literal possible level, carrying weapons made of suffering. That extends to the Sith's relationship with everything around them. What they cannot grow, they break. What they cannot earn, they take. What does not serve them willingly, they force. Ahsoka Tano, who recovered Sith crystals from an Inquisitor she defeated, did something the tradition had never seen before. She reversed the bleeding process. She poured light side energy into the crystals instead of darkness, healing them, and they turned white. Not red, not the standard blue or green of Jedi crystals. White, as though they had been through something neither Jedi nor Sith had put them through, and had come out the other side as something new. Her signature white lightsabers are the physical expression of a path between the 2 traditions. Neither suppression nor weaponization, but something the code does not have a line for. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is something about Darth Vader in the years between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope that the films never quite show directly. The daily texture of being the most feared person in the galaxy, while being incapable of being the person you actually were. The Darth Vader comic run by Charles Soule explored that period in significant depth, and what emerges from it is a portrait of a man constructing a new identity out of the ruins of the old one. Vader is disciplined in a way that Anakin never was, because Vader has nothing left to be undisciplined about. Every impulse Anakin ever had, toward love, toward warmth, toward connection, has been sealed off by the suit, by the circumstances of what he did on Mustafar, by the knowledge of what happened to Padme. The first Kyber crystal Vader bleeds, according to those comics, is won in a fight with a Jedi survivor who refuses to give up their weapon. Vader defeats them, takes the crystal, bleeds it. The process is depicted as psychically violent. The crystal shows Vader visions of what he has lost while fighting back. He forces it through. The resulting red lightsaber is the first object he has constructed entirely from grief and rage. His instrument, his tool, his own scar, carried in his hand. The Inquisitorius is another aspect of this period worth understanding in full. The Grand Inquisitor, who leads them, was once a Jedi Temple Guard, a role that carried significant spiritual authority within the Order. He fell before Order 66, turned to the dark side while still a Jedi, and became one of Vader's most effective instruments precisely because he knew exactly how Jedi thought. He knew their training, their philosophy, their habits of mind. He knew which fears the Council had taught them not to feel and how to use those suppressed fears as weapons. The Inquisitors, broadly, were designed that way, broken from within by people who had once been fully within the tradition they were now hunting. Vader himself had been something similar. The most effective destroyer of the Jedi Order was someone who had been shaped by it, who knew every form of lightsaber combat, who had trained alongside the people he was now pursuing, who had been inside the temple he helped reduce to ash. The Obi-Wan Kenobi series, released on Disney Plus in 2022 and set roughly a decade after Revenge of the Sith, returned to the relationship between those two men one more time. Vader tracked Obi-Wan across multiple systems and eventually cornered him on a barren world. The duel between them was not just physical. It was an argument about the past, conducted through violence. Obi-Wan, who had spent years in desert exile racked by guilt about what had happened to Anakin, finally said what he had never been able to say. He said, "I am sorry, Anakin, for all of it." Vader's response was one of the most precise and psychologically considered lines in recent Star Wars. He said, "I am not your failure, Obi-Wan. You did not kill Anakin Skywalker. I did." Let that sit for a moment. That is Vader choosing the darkness one more time, in words rather than action. He is insisting on the identity he has built, refusing the possibility that Anakin still exists somewhere beneath it, refusing the grief of that refusal, refusing to give Obi-Wan the absolution he is offering. It is also, from a certain angle, Vader telling an uncomfortable truth. Anakin's choices were Anakin's choices. The dark side did not reach in and pull him against his will. He knelt. He chose. Both things are true simultaneously, and neither one makes it easier. Vader spent the years of the Empire's consolidation doing what Sidious required, hunting Jedi, crushing dissent, serving as the visible face of Imperial terror, while privately building his castle on Mustafar and attempting to reach through the Force to a wife who was already gone. The portal he tried to open was designed to connect to the dimension of the dead. There is no evidence in the canonical sources that he ever reached Padme through it. What he built was a monument to the thing he could not have, on the world where he lost it. That is not the biography of someone who chose power freely. That is the biography of someone who chose power and discovered, over more than 2 decades of its exercise, exactly what it could not give him. There is also, in this period of the Empire, the matter of Kyber crystals and the Death Star. The Death Star's superlaser was powered by massive Kyber crystals. Kyber crystals, attuned to the light side, can be corrupted and enlarged through dark side processes. The planet-destroying weapon at the center of the Empire's ultimate military project was, in one reading, the Sith applied to an entire weapon system, something living that had been broken and redirected into a tool of pure destruction. Rogue One showed what it cost to steal the plans for that weapon. A team of ordinary people, none of them Force-sensitive, none of them legendary, died on a beach so that the information could be transmitted. They were not chosen. They were not prophesied. They gave their lives because the alternative was watching a weapon made of broken light destroy everything they cared about. The rebellion against the Empire was not, at its base, a story about Force users and their ancient arguments. It was a story about people who looked at what the Sith had built and decided they would not live in it. That matters because the Sith, in their 1,000-year project, never adequately accounted for it. Darth Bane's Rule of Two was designed to produce a single Sith Lord powerful enough to dominate the galaxy. It never had a theory for what to do about the majority of the galaxy's people who were not Force-sensitive and who, when given sufficient reason, were capable of extraordinary resistance. Palpatine built his empire on fear, and fear worked, until the people who were afraid of something more than the Empire found each other at Yavin and Hoth and Endor. There is a version of the Sith story where the Sith win. It requires only that Darth Vader stay still, that Anakin Skywalker, in that final moment, choose power over love one more time. The entire 1,000-year edifice of the Sith project, the Rule of Two, the shadow manipulation, the grand plan, the Clone Wars, the Empire, the Inquisitors, the Sith Eternal. All of it was balanced, in the end, against a dying man's decision to be a father. The darkness lost to something it had never taken seriously. That is what 25,000 years of Sith history produced. A tradition so committed to power that it forgot to account for the things power cannot reach. And here is the last thing worth saying about all of this before we let the light drop. At the end of Return of the Jedi, on Endor, 3 figures stand at the edge of the Ewok celebration. Yoda, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Anakin Skywalker, restored to what he looked like before the suit. Not Vader, Anakin. That is the picture the whole saga hangs on. Not the Emperor at the height of his power. Not the fleets. Not the Death Stars. 3 ghosts, watching a family reunion in the trees. Still there. Still present. Still a part of the Force. The Sith spent 25,000 years trying to escape death, and the Jedi, at their best, simply learned how to be a part of what came after. That is the quiet, unshowy answer the tradition had always been waiting for the Sith to notice. Sidious died on Exegol. Vader died as Anakin, unmasked, looking at his son with his own eyes for the first and last time. Exar Kun's spirit remained trapped in the temples on Yavin 4 for 4,000 years. Sadow died in slow, self-imposed exile. Ragnos died on Korriban and was buried in a tomb his own successors would eventually rob. Every one of them chased continuation. Every one of them ended up either destroyed or locked in a stone room the galaxy stopped visiting. Meanwhile, the Force went on. It always does. That is the argument the story has been quietly making, in the background, the whole time.